The Vex Collective controlled most of the galaxy. They had built their empire over thousands of years by taking what they wanted and destroying anything that stood in their way. Their ships were fast and deadly. Their weapons could level entire cities in seconds. The various species that served the collective did so because they had no other choice. Resistance meant death. Cooperation meant survival. This was the law of the galaxy, and no one dared to challenge it. On a world called Earth, located in a small solar system at the edge of known space, humans lived and worked without knowing what was coming. They had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. Their technology was primitive compared to the great powers of the galaxy. Their governments were divided and weakened by internal conflicts. Their military was strong by Earth standards but laughably inadequate by the measures of the Vex. They were sitting targets, and they did not even know it yet. Commander Kale of the Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the reports about Earth. The planet had been identified during a routine survey. Initial scans showed abundant resources and a population that could be useful as labor. The data suggested minimal resistance. Kale smiled. This would be an easy victory. He had conquered more than 50 worlds, and each one had been easier than the last. People were predictable. They would resist for a time, then they would break. Earth would be no different. The invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Earth on a cold morning in March. 75 Vex warships appeared in the sky without warning. Their weapons were charged. Their soldiers were ready. The first strikes hit military installations across all 6 continents. Air Force bases were destroyed. Naval ports were obliterated. Radar stations went silent. Within 3 hours, Earth's organized military resistance was crushed. News networks around the world tried to report what was happening, but the aliens were thorough. Television towers were targeted and destroyed. Radio stations went dark. The internet was flooded with signals that corrupted everything it touched. Within hours, most humans on Earth had no way to know the full scope of the disaster. They heard sirens. They saw explosions in the sky. They heard emergency broadcasts telling them to shelter in place and to cooperate with the incoming forces. Captain Lisa was inside a military command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains when the first attack came. She had been a naval officer for 20 years and had always known that enemies could appear from anywhere. When the alarm started screaming, she moved fast. She grabbed 3 engineering specialists and ran toward the lower levels of the facility. Around them, other soldiers tried to mount a defense. The walls shook as explosives detonated above them. Lisa and her team reached a communications room that had been built during the Cold War decades ago. It was old, but it was isolated. It had its own power supply. It was not connected to any of the main computer networks. They sealed the door behind them and looked at the equipment. Some of it was so old that it barely still worked. Lisa had trained for emergency situations her entire career, and she knew that this was the moment she had been preparing for. She looked at the 3 specialists with her. There was no time for doubt, no time for fear, no time for anything except action. Lisa said, "We need to send a message, a real message, something that can reach beyond this planet. Do we have the capability to do that with this equipment?" Michael was the oldest of the 3 engineers. He had worked with communications technology for 40 years. He studied the room carefully, running his hands along the panels and checking the connections. He said, "Yes, it is possible, but it will be slow, and it will be weak. The message will be broadcasting into space on all the old frequency bands. Most civilizations will not even be listening on these channels anymore." Lisa knew he was right, but she also knew that staying silent meant certain death for everyone on Earth. She said, "Send it anyway. Tell anyone who might be listening that Earth is under attack. Tell them we need help. Tell them who we are and where we are. Tell them everything." The team worked through the night. The building above them was attacked repeatedly. They could hear the roar of weapons and the crash of falling structures. The entire complex shook around them. But the old communications equipment kept working. It was designed to survive nuclear war, and it was certainly surviving alien bombardment. They built a message in the simplest terms they could think of. They used mathematical constants and basic radio signals to explain their location. They repeated the message over and over on every frequency they could access. By the morning of the third day, it was clear that Earth had lost. The Vex had orbital supremacy. They controlled the skis. Their ground forces were collecting people from cities and towns and loading them onto massive transport ships. Millions of humans were being taken away from Earth to labor camps on distant worlds. Those who resisted were eliminated. Those who cooperated were herded like animals onto transport ships. The world was being conquered in the most efficient way possible. Lisa and her team stayed underground for a week after they finished sending their message. They had no illusions about the odds. They had sent a signal into the dark hoping that someone, somewhere, might hear it. In a galaxy of trillions of people across millions of worlds, what chance was there that anyone would receive their message? What chance was there that anyone would care? What chance was there that anyone could help? These questions haunted them as they sat in the dark beneath the mountains and listened to Earth falling. But Lisa refused to surrender. She refused to let Earth be forgotten without at least one message sent into the void. She refused to accept that humanity had come so far and evolved so much only to be erased from existence. The message continued to broadcast even after the power systems failed. It traveled outward at the speed of light, carrying with it the desperate plea of a dying world. No one knew where it would go. No one knew if anyone would hear it. But it was there, in the vast darkness of space, a small voice calling out for help. The colony on 442b was the most successful human settlement beyond Earth. Over 200 years ago, the first ships had arrived on this distant world and began building a civilization from scratch. The people who lived here had adapted to the harsh conditions. They had built strong communities. They had learned to survive on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. They had become something different from their ancestors who lived on Earth. They were tougher. They were more resilient. They were ready for anything that space could throw at them. Captain Hayes was the commander of the civilian militia that defended 442b. He was born on this world. His great-grandfather had come on one of the first colony ships. His family had died fighting the hostile creatures that roamed this planet. His family had starved during the first winters when the crops failed. But his family had also survived. They had endured. And because they endured, Hayes had been born here and raised to be strong. Was in the communications center when the signal came through. It had taken 3 months to reach this far colony world. The radio waves had traveled across the vast darkness of space, bouncing off cosmic dust and being absorbed by radiation fields. By the time it reached 442b, the signal was weak and broken. But it was still a signal. It was still a voice calling from a world that had been almost forgotten. The technician who received the message was named. She had been working in communications for 15 years. She knew every type of signal that came from the stars. Most of them were natural, some were from other colony worlds. This one was different. Listen to the breaking voice as it repeated the same message over and over. Earth was under attack. Earth needed help. The signal included coordinates. The signal included identification codes. The signal was real. Ran from the communications center to find Governor Rachel Stone. The governor was in her office dealing with the usual problems of running a colony world. Crops were failing in the northern settlements. A disease had broken out in the livestock herds. The water treatment systems needed repairs. These were the problems that occupied her every day. Burst through the door without knocking. She said, "Governor, we have received a transmission from Earth." Rachel Stone stood up from her desk. She had been the governor of 442b for 8 years. She was 53 years old. She had been born in a habitat dome in the lower levels of the planet. She had studied leadership on Earth through old videos and recordings. She knew that Earth existed. She had read about it in history lessons. But Earth had always seemed like a story from ancient times. It had always seemed far away and impossible to reach. Now Earth was calling for help. Played the message for Rachel. The governor listened to the desperate plea from Captain Lisa. She listened to the coordinates. She listened to the simple request for rescue. When the message ended, the room was silent. Rachel said, "How long has this message been traveling?" "Check the data," she said, 3 months, maybe longer. Earth transmitted it at least that long ago. Rachel understood what that meant. Whatever had happened to Earth, it had happened 3 months in the past. The attack might already be over. The people calling for help might already be dead. But they might also still be alive and waiting for rescue. She said, "Convene the council. We need to meet immediately." The Council of 442B consisted of 7 leaders from the major settlements on the planet. They met within 2 hours in the main government building. Governor Rachel Stone explained the situation. She played the message for them. She showed them the coordinates to Earth. She told them about Captain Lisa and her request for help. The council members were shocked. Most of them had never thought about Earth except as an historical curiosity. One of them was the leader of the southern settlements. He said, "This is not our responsibility. Earth is too far away. The journey would take months. By the time we arrive, the attack would be over. We cannot risk our people on a suicide mission." But Hayes, who was sitting in the observation section, stood up and spoke anyway. He said, "Earth is where we came from. Everyone on this planet came from Earth or had ancestors who came from Earth. If we do not go to help Earth, what does that make us? We became colonists because we chose to take risks and explore new worlds. Now people from our are calling for help, and we are going to ignore them." Another council member, Diana Foster, said, "Hayes, you are young. You do not understand the politics of this situation. Earth has not contacted us for over 100 years. They ignored us. They pretended we did not exist. Now they need something and they call. This is their problem, not ours." Looked directly at Diana and said, "My great-grandfather died on this planet so that his family could survive. Every person on this world is here because someone was brave enough to risk everything on a chance to build something new. That is the only thing we have ever had. That courage to act when others said it was impossible. If we lose that, we are not colonists anymore. We are just people hiding from the universe." Rachel Stone listened to the arguments going back and forth. Some council members wanted to send help. Others wanted to ignore the message. The debate went on for hours. Finally, Rachel called for a vote. The council decided that they would prepare a rescue mission, but that it would be led by volunteers only. No one would be forced to go. Anyone who wanted to return to Earth and try to save their ancestral world was welcome to do so. Anyone who wanted to stay and protect 442B was also welcome to do so. Hayes volunteered immediately. So did Jacob Cooper, the best pilot in the colony. Engineer Susan Wells said she would help prepare the old ships for the journey. Adrian, the colony's senior medic, said he would go because his parents had always told him stories about Earth, and he wanted to see where they had come from. Within 2 weeks, more than 2,000 people had volunteered for the mission. Some were soldiers trained for combat. Some were engineers and technicians. Some were doctors and support staff. All of them knew that the odds of success were low. All of them knew that they might never return home. They volunteered anyway because Hayes had reminded them of who they were and where they came from. They volunteered because the call from Earth was not just a radio signal. It was a call to their own humanity. The 10 ships of the rescue fleet were not impressive by galactic standards. They had been built decades ago and had served various purposes over the years. Some had been mining ships. Some had been transport vessels. Some had been old cargo carriers that had been modified for this mission. But they were the best ships available on 442B, and the engineers worked around the clock to prepare them for the long journey to Earth. Susan Wells oversaw the modification of the ships. She had to upgrade power systems that were barely functional. She had to repair hull breaches that had been patched 100 times over. She had to install new engines that could handle the stress of a long-distance journey without breaking down. Her team worked 18-hour days for 3 weeks straight. When they finally finished, the ships were not much faster than they had been. But they would make the journey to Earth without falling apart in the middle of space. That would have to be enough. Jacob Cooper ran simulations on the navigation computers. He had to plot a course that would take the fleet across the vast distance between 442b and Earth. He had to calculate gravitational forces and avoid solar winds and account for the movement of planets and stars. Navigation in space was not simple. One small error could send the entire fleet off course and into the cold darkness where rescue would be impossible. Jacob worked until his eyes hurt. He checked his calculations 1,000 times. He would not allow a mistake to doom this mission. Captain Hayes trained his soldiers and combat teams. He knew that they would be facing an enemy far superior in technology and firepower. The Vex could destroy a human fighter with a single blast. The Vex could level buildings from high altitude. The Vex had weapons that humans could barely comprehend, but also knew that the Vex were expecting to face an exhausted, broken population. They were not expecting to face trained soldiers arriving from the stars with fresh equipment and fresh determination. Worked with Sargent to develop battle plans. They studied the Vex tactics based on the limited information they had received from Earth. They learned how the Vex positioned their defensive systems. They learned how the Vex organized their ground forces. They learned that the Vex relied heavily on technology and organization. They did not improvise. They did not adapt quickly, said, "The Vex are strong, but they are predictable. We will use their predictability against them." Adrian prepared medical facilities on the largest ship. He knew they would encounter wounded people when they reached Earth. He had to be ready to treat injuries caused by Vex weapons. He had to be ready to perform surgery in zero gravity. He had to be ready for disease and malnutrition among the captive population. Adrian was 62 years old and had spent his entire career treating people. He had never seen real combat or military operations, but he was not afraid. He was going to Earth because his parents had always told him he came from a world of brave people. Now he would find out if that was true. The 3-month journey to Earth was used for continuous preparation and training. Hayes held combat drills every single day. His soldiers practiced assault formations in the cargo holds of the ships. They learned to work in zero gravity and in artificial gravity. They learned to handle weapons that they had been given and to rely on each other completely. There was no margin for error. There was no room for individual heroes. This mission would succeed only if every person worked together as a single force. Jacob Cooper used part of the journey to gather intelligence from distant communication relays. The relay stations broadcast news and information across the galaxy. From the fragments Jacob could access, a picture of Earth's situation became clear. The Vex occupation was complete and thorough. Most of Earth's military had been destroyed. Millions of people had been transported off-world. The planet itself had been divided into occupation zones. Resistance was being crushed wherever it appeared. The situation was worse than anyone on 442b had feared. But there was also evidence that pockets of resistance still existed. There were reports of attacks on Vex facilities. There were rumors of underground networks helping escaped prisoners. There were hints that Captain Lisa and her team might still be alive. These small pieces of information gave hope. It meant that not all of humanity had been broken. It meant that some people were still willing to fight. Susan Wells monitored the power systems as the fleet traveled. The engines pushed harder than they had been designed to do. The life support systems worked at full capacity. Everything was running at the edge of failure. Susan knew that one major breakdown could strand the entire fleet. She checked every system daily. She ran diagnostics constantly. She prepared backup plans for every possible failure. When the engines on one ship started to overheat 3 weeks before arrival at Earth, Susan implemented an emergency cooling protocol that she designed herself. It worked. The ship continued forward. On the night before they emerged at Earth's solar system, gathered all the volunteers together. They were gathered in the largest cargo hold of the main ship. 2,000 people stood shoulder to shoulder. They came from every settlement on 442b. They were young and old. They were soldiers and civilians. They were people who had left behind families and homes, stood at a podium and looked at them. He said, "Tomorrow we arrive at Earth. Tomorrow we begin operations to rescue our people." Some of us will not return. Some of us will be wounded or killed. But we are doing this because we are human. We are doing this because Earth is where we came from. We are doing this because no matter how far we travel into space, we never forget who we are or where we came from. Tomorrow, we show the galaxy what humanity can do. The soldiers and civilians cheered. They cheered for Hayes. They cheered for each other. They cheered for the ancestors who had left Earth and built a new world. They cheered for the people they were about to rescue. In that moment, standing together in the cargo hold of a ship traveling to a distant world, they understood what they really were. They were humanity's answer to the darkness. They were the descendants of those who had dared to reach for the stars. And they were about to prove that no force in the galaxy could destroy them. The Vex sensor networks detected the approaching fleet when the ships were still hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from Earth. The Vex commander in orbital control reviewed the reports and felt no concern. 10 small ships, holding no tactical significance. The analysis systems classified them as trading vessels or long-distance transports. No weapons capability. No real threat. The Vex commander did not bother to send interceptors. He did not bother to alert the main fleet. He simply logged the contact and moved on to more important matters. This was the first critical mistake that would cost him everything. Jacob Cooper guided the fleet toward Earth on a course that the Vex sensors considered trivial and unimportant. He understood that he had only one chance to reach the planet. He took his ships in at angles that made them appear as if they were moving away from the planet. The Vex tracking systems lost interest. The fleet continued forward, invisible to their eyes. When the ships finally revealed their position and fired their weapons, the shock was absolute and complete. The first assault struck the communication relay station that the Vex used to coordinate operations across the planet. The entire station went dark. Orders stopped flowing from orbit to the ground forces. Vex military units across 6 continents suddenly found themselves cut off from central command. Confusion and panic began to spread. Captain Hayes took the first assault shuttle down to the surface personally. Around him, 30 soldiers prepared their weapons and armor. They had been trained for this moment, but training was never the same as actual combat. The shuttle shook as it descended through Earth's atmosphere. Alarms sounded as Vex defensive fire tried to track them. Jacob Cooper worked frantically in the command center above to keep the Vex firing solutions from locking onto the shuttle. The shuttle landed near the hidden command center where Captain Lisa had been hiding for 3 months, led his team through the rubble and destruction above ground. Everything around them was burned and broken, collapsed buildings, destroyed vehicles, the marks of war everywhere. They moved quickly through the ruins and found the entrance to the underground facility. When Hayes descended into the bunker and found Lisa, both of them understood immediately what was happening. They did not have time for conversation. They did not have time to explain anything. Lisa knew that represented hope from the stars, knew that Lisa represented Earth's resistance. They shook hands briefly and then got to work. Lisa showed the locations of the main Vex occupation bases. She showed him where the prisoner transport ships were docked. She showed him the weak points in the Vex defense network, based on 3 months of observation. Said, "How many people can we rescue from this area?" Lisa said, 3,000, maybe more if we move fast. There is a transport facility about 50 kilometers north from here. It holds the people waiting for shipment off-world. Made a decision. He said, "You lead the assault on the transport facility. I will take my team and hit the main military installation to the east. We move simultaneously. We move fast. We hit them before they can organize a response." Sergeant took his assault team and moved north toward the transport facility. They traveled in small groups through the ruins of what had once been a prosperous human city. They saw the physical marks of the Vex occupation. Tall alien structures had been built alongside human buildings. Detention camps had been constructed. Execution grounds were marked with the charred remains of the dead. But they also saw signs of human resistance, damaged Vex equipment, supply caches that had been raided. Evidence that humans had been fighting back. When they reached the transport facility, the Vex guards were completely unprepared. They had believed that their position was secure. They had believed that human resistance was broken. They were not ready for trained soldiers appearing from the darkness with weapons ready. The firefight was intense and violent. Humans fell. Vex soldiers fell. But the assault team pushed forward and breached the main detention building. Inside, over 3,000 humans were being held in horrible conditions. Many were sick. Many were starving. Many had given up hope. When emerged from the darkness with weapons blazing, telling them to move toward the shuttles, they did not believe it at first. They thought it was a trick. But as more and more people realized that actual rescue was happening, they moved. They ran. They began to hope again. Hayes' team hit the main military installation from 3 sides simultaneously. Explosions shattered the Vex defensive positions. Human soldiers moved through the installation with deadly accuracy. The Vex soldiers, trained only in overwhelming assault using superior technology, did not know how to respond to coordinated human attacks that used intelligence and speed instead of brute force. In orbit above Earth, Susan Wells coordinated the shuttle operations. She managed the ship's defensive systems. She kept the Vex orbital forces confused and unable to organize an effective response. When Vex fighters tried to intercept the rescue shuttles, Jacob Cooper used advanced piloting to evade them. 3 shuttles were damaged. 1 was shot down. 47 people died in that shuttle, but the rest made it back to the ships. Adrian worked frantically in the medical bay. Wounded people kept arriving. Dehydrated people, starving people, people with injuries from Vex weapons that he had never seen before. Adrian had practiced emergency medicine for 4 decades. He had handled disasters and accidents and diseases, but he had never seen anything like this. He worked through the pain in his hands. He worked through his own exhaustion. He refused to stop working as long as there was someone who needed his help. The rescue operations continued for 2 days. Hayes' teams hit facility after facility, prisoner transport centers, military installations, supply depots. They freed people wherever they could find them. The Vex response was slow and disorganized. Their communication network had been destroyed. Their command structure had been broken. They had never trained for combat against an enemy that could think and adapt and make decisions quickly. By the end of the 2nd day, 15,000 people had been rescued. The shuttles were loaded to capacity. The ships above were filled with rescued prisoners. Some of them were in shock. Some of them were crying. Some of them were simply sitting quietly, unable to process what had happened. They had expected to die in Vex labor camps. They had expected to never see Earth again. Now they were being lifted from the planet by their own people. Hayes was the last to leave the surface. He stood on the landing pad and looked back at Earth one final time. The planet was wounded but not destroyed. Resistance had cost them dearly, but it had also kept them human. He turned and walked toward the final shuttle. Behind him, the city burned with the fires of the retreating Vex forces. Ahead of him, the stars waited. The final shuttle reached the main ship just as the Vex orbital defense systems were beginning to mount an effective counterattack. The Vex ships changed their tactics. They stopped trying to destroy the rescue fleet and instead moved to block their path toward the hyperspace jump point. But Jacob Cooper had already planned for this. He had studied the Vex movements and had predicted where they would position themselves. He guided the fleet on a course that avoided their blockade. Hayes stood on the bridge of the main ship and watched Earth grow smaller below them. 15,237 people had been rescued. 342 soldiers and crew members had died in the rescue operation. These numbers meant something. Every person rescued was a life saved. Every person who died was a sacrifice that made rescue possible. Understood the weight of those numbers. He felt the responsibility of them. The fleet accelerated away from Earth's orbital zone. The Vex pursued them at maximum speed. Weapons fire cut through space between the ships. One of the escort ships was hit repeatedly and began to lose power. Had to make a decision that no commander should ever have to make. He said, "Leave them. We cannot slow down. If we do, the entire fleet will be captured or destroyed." The damaged ship was left behind. The people aboard that ship understood what it meant. Some of them activated the ship's self-destruct systems to prevent their capture. Some of them died when Vex forces boarded the vessel. 15 more people died so that the rest could escape. Hayes added their names to the list of sacrifice. Jacob Cooper pushed the fleet's engines to their absolute maximum capability. He had disabled all safety systems. He had every protocol that was designed to protect the ships. The engines ran hot. They pushed harder than they were ever supposed to push. One ship's engine overheated and began to fail. 53 people died as that ship was destroyed by its own reactor explosion. Jacob had already calculated the odds. He had known that some ships would not make it. But he had also known that stopping to help them would guarantee the failure of the entire mission. The fleet reached the hyperspace jump point and activated their drives. The universe twisted around them. Space folded in ways that should not be possible. The ships entered hyperspace, traveling faster than anything living could comprehend. Behind them, Earth became a distant memory. Behind them, the Vex forces tried to follow but found themselves unable to match the speed of the human ships. When the fleet emerged from hyperspace near 442b, they had lost 3 ships and 897 people. They had rescued 15,237 people from Earth. They had dealt the Vex a defeat that the collective had not experienced in thousands of years. They had proven that humans were something more than what the galaxy had believed them to be. The celebration in 442b began when the ships first appeared in the orbital zones. All the colonies broadcast news of the rescue throughout the planet. Hayes had done it. He had taken a ragtag fleet of aging ships and had traveled across the galaxy to rescue people from the Vex. The people of 442b emerged from their settlements and looked up at the sky knowing that hope still existed, knowing that humanity was still capable of great things. Adrian was the first to greet the arriving refugees. He had been waiting in the medical centers with his staff. They had prepared for massive casualties. They were ready for every type of injury and disease and trauma that they could imagine. The refugees came from Earth sick and wounded and traumatized. Many had been in Vex captivity for months. Some had seen their families torn apart. Some had lost everything they owned. But they were alive, and they were home, or they were on their way home at least. Governor Rachel Stone received Hayes in her office. He was exhausted and thin and covered in the dust and blood of combat. He had not slept in over 36 hours, but he looked at the governor and smiled. He said, "We have brought Earth's children home." Rachel said, "You have done more than that. You have shown the entire galaxy that Earth is not a place to be taken lightly. You have shown the galaxy that when humans are threatened, other humans will answer the call. You have done something that will echo through history." The days and weeks that followed were difficult. The refugees needed food and medical care. They needed places to live. They needed to adjust to life on a new world. Many of them had never been to 442b. They had never even known that 442b existed. Now they had to learn to live here. New settlements were built to house them. Agricultural programs were expanded to feed them. Education programs were created to teach them about their new home. Jacob Cooper met with the engineers and pilots who had served on the rescue mission. They studied what had gone wrong and what had gone right. They learned from every mistake. They understood that this rescue had only been possible because they had been willing to take risks and to move beyond what was considered safe and normal. They had taken a fleet of ancient ships and had pushed them to the edge of destruction. They had succeeded because they were willing to fail. And his soldiers were honored in ceremonies attended by thousands of people. They had gone to Earth expecting to die. Many of them had come back wounded. Some of them had come back broken by what they had seen. But they had accomplished something that no one had believed possible. The people of 442b understood that they owed their lives to the courage of those soldiers. 6 months after the rescue mission, Hayes stood on a hill overlooking one of the new settlements. Thousands of people from Earth now lived in the colonies of 442b. They had begun to integrate with the colonists. They had begun to build new lives. They had begun to hope again, looked at the blue sky of this distant world and remembered the blue sky of Earth. Both worlds now held his heart. The message that had been sent from Earth 3 months before the rescue had finally accomplished its purpose. It had reached someone who was willing to listen. It had reached people who understood that no matter how far humans traveled from their home, they never stopped being human. They never stopped caring for each other. They never stopped being willing to risk everything for those who were in danger. Vex Collective had believed that Earth was conquered. They had believed that humans would break under occupation. They had believed that no help would come. They had been wrong about everything. And as the news of the rescue spread through the galaxy, other species began to understand something important. Humanity was not a species to be trifled with. Humanity was not a species to underestimate. Humanity was a species that would reach across the stars to save its own people. And that was a powerful thing.